Good evening and welcome to OCEARCH After Hours. I'm Kara Lawless, Education Coordinator for OCEARCH, and joining me tonight is our Chief Scientist and Veterinarian, Dr. Harley Newton. I'm so glad you're joining us tonight as we dive into the importance of Atlantic Canada on the Western North Atlantic white shark population. Before we get started, make sure you click the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. In case you are new to OCEARCH, we are a global nonprofit organization dedicated to returning our oceans to balance and abundance through groundbreaking research on sharks and other marine life. We're currently running a fundraiser to help support this important work, and every donation, no matter the size, helps us to continue our mission. You can find the donation link right here on the screen and in the description below. Now let's get started. Harley, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about this awesome population of sharks.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. And because this is a new format, we wanted to actually start sort of from the beginning. Before talking about Canada, just talking about the whole range of the Western North Atlantic white shark, so we can talk about Canada as an important part of that. So the graphic that I'm showing you on the right came from a paper published by our group in 2021, Franks et al., which looked at the movements of the first 48 juvenile to adult white sharks that were tagged as part of our multidisciplinary project, the Western North Atlantic White Shark Project. What we were trying to do was essentially really map out in finer scale detail what the full migratory pattern was of these animals, the extent of their range, and then identify critical habitats as were possible. We started this work in the Western North Atlantic in 2012, initially by tagging and releasing 5 subadult and adult female white sharks, and then came back in 2016 and started focusing in first on the nursery site and then on tagging more age classes after that. So what you're looking at here, and I'm going to use my arrow, which I hope you can see, is sort of the result of the movements of those first 48 animals. We know from the work that we assisted Toby Curtis and his group in Long Island with, that there is this nursery site that's off of Long Island, New York. They've also shown that there's an overwintering site that very likely is sort of an overwintering for the first year of life, the young year animals. But the full range of the white shark expands really rapidly after that, and they use essentially the entire extent of the Atlantic coast from Newfoundland all the way down around the tip of Florida into the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, and even down into Mexico, and as far south as around Cuba. So a huge range for these animals. The interesting part of this has been really the Atlantic Canada piece. We know that white sharks in Canada is not a new phenomenon. There are documented occurrences of white sharks in Canadian waters that go back to the 1800s. But the sightings there were really considered rare until very recently. So certainly early on, it seemed that Canadian waters really represented sort of the extreme northern boundary of the Western North Atlantic white shark range. But since about 2007, when there was really this kind of reemergence and increase in numbers of white sharks that were being seen in Cape Cod at a summer aggregation site, there has been steadily an increase in white sharks up in Atlantic Canada. So this area from Massachusetts up through Newfoundland is basically the summer-fall foraging area. This is an area where these animals go basically from around the 1st of July until about the 15th of October. And they tend to rely pretty heavily on aggregating around marine mammals, but also rely on other large fish species as well in the area. It's a time to feed and aggregate, but we know very little about what their other activities are when they're there. So as I said before, basically in 2007, when there were first noted these increases in Cape Cod, there also started being these increased reports of seeing white sharks in Canada around about 2010. And there were a lot of questions around that. Was this the influence of, social media, people having smartphones, having more cameras, being able to document them, or was this something that was really happening? What were the drivers behind this? And as part of our work, we were tagging animals largely throughout sort of the northeastern extent of their range, both in the mid-Atlantic, northeastern part, and the southeastern part. And we had an animal that we tagged in the southeastern part of their range, Hilton, on the 3rd of March, that really showed us how
Looks like we got about a 12-foot mature male white shark out here.
Been waiting on this one for a while. Finally got a nice little weather break and paid off. So let's see what happens here.
So obviously it's a mature male. Hey, getting blood? Have the tooth ready to go. All right, we're good. Girth is 6 feet 8.5 inches. Largest mature male spot tagged with first full health assessment workup in North Atlantic history, and we're going to name it Hilton for the great people of Hilton Head here.
So Hilton was an adult male. It was the first male that we had tagged and released that we'd been able to document was reproductively active. This animal was making sperm at the time that we caught him. So he was a very interesting and important animal to follow. And what he did from 2017 when he was tagged all the way through 2019 is he ranged in the eastern Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, to the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, and extensively used the coast of Atlantic Canada. So again, there already were groups working on and asking questions about, was Atlantic Canada really becoming more important? And here we had one of the sharks that we tagged go to Atlantic Canada. That was really the impetus behind starting to include Atlantic Canada in our expedition schedule here at OCEARCH. So as Kara shared, we are a nonprofit organization that facilitates the research of a multidisciplinary team of scientists. The Western North Atlantic White Shark Project comprised 25 different projects and supported the work of 40 different primary investigators. By performing expeditions using our specialized vessel, which has a hydraulic lift that can help to lift the animals up to facilitate a very fast workup on these animals and then release, we're able to assist in doing a host of different projects beyond just tagging, including all sorts of biological sampling that are important to understand the basic physiology, diet, and other reasons why these animals might be in the area at the time. So this is a map that shows sort of all the expeditions and the animals caught throughout the Western North Atlantic White Shark Project until recently, which we were at 92 until this winter. And you can see we, following Hilton, did a series of expeditions, 4 in total, that were out of the Halifax, Lunenburg area in the sort of middle Atlantic part of Nova Scotia, and then the Cape Breton area, Sydney area as well. And we had great success on these trips. We tagged and released 7 white sharks in 2018, 11 in 2019, 8 in 2020, and then 10 white sharks in 2021. And I think that's all I had to say about that. Kara, were there other questions we were going to go through?
No, I think that was good for that slide. Just talk about the importance of Canada and kind of showing the breakdown also of where we're looking for different age classes of white sharks as well. And that's kind of based off that first image that you put up there as well.
Absolutely. So these sharks in Atlantic Canada wound up being really unique and kind of interesting as we've been following their movements over 4 years. The first being that they do show a preference for the Atlantic Canada region. The animals that we have tagged and released in Atlantic Canada tend to spend their summer and fall in Atlantic Canada, come and use the coast of basically the Carolinas through Florida and into the Gulf in the winter, and then preferentially seem to return to Atlantic Canada for the next summer-fall foraging period. So this is an interesting trend and phenomenon that we're working on studying further. Additionally, we were interested in continuing this work in collaboration. And what's been exciting here at OCEARCH is that as we have sort of slowly wrapped up the Western North Atlantic White Shark Project, as is typical in science, we solved a lot of questions with that project, but we also wound up having a lot of additional questions that were left to answer. And a lot of them are revolved around sort of this biological sampling that we've been working to doing. As part of the Western North Atlantic White Shark Project, we've been trying to get at some of the basic physiology of these animals, understanding when they are reproductively active and where, understanding what the important diet structure is, what are the prey species they're feeding on during different times of year, during different seasons, at different ages. And we started to work on a different strategy, in part because we were also focusing on building our home base here in Jacksonville, Florida, with our academic association with Jacksonville University. So the work that we've been doing during the winter this year was largely focused on, instead of 3 expeditions a year in 3 particular regions, we were trying to work just out of 1 region monthly to get the most access to the most animals over the longest period of time. So we were trying to sample and tag animals during January through May. And then an opportunity arose to start a collaboration with one of our important partners in Canada, and that's Dr. Nigel Hussey. So Dr. Hussey is associated with the University of Windsor, and it had long been his real passion to have a marine field station in Atlantic Canada, in much the same way that the Bimini Biological Field Station has served to educate and help start the careers of so many different marine scientists and shark scientists. And he's, over the last 4 years, had the opportunity to slowly put that in place. So this summer, as you saw, we've been working again in Nova Scotia, Canada, but on a very different project. And this project is understanding better how and why white sharks use Canada through this association and project that's being run by Dr. Hussey from the Tancook Islands Marine Field Station. So the first expeditions that we did were based in Lunenburg and worked on some of the islands south of here. The Tancook Island Marine Field Station that we just completed our first 2-week period of work with Dr. Hussey is on Big Tancook Island, which is in a region along the Atlantic coast known as Mahone Bay. Dr. Hussey has been studying the region for the last 3 years and has installed a pretty extensive acoustic array to detect acoustically tagged sharks as they come in and start using the area, and has started to get a better understanding of sort of how they are using this coast, and potentially started to ask a bunch more questions about sort of why they're here. So in July, as I think you saw, we had a very successful trip out of this field station. We were able to tag and release 7 animals, 6 of which that you can follow in near real time on our Global Shark Tracker. They were a mixture of male and female animals. The majority of males, 3 males, were subadults in about the 9 to 10 foot range. And then we had 3 juvenile females, again, in sort of the 9 to 10 foot range. We had one sort of standout in this experience, which was a nice size adult male baker who was 12, almost 13 feet, who we tagged and released in the middle of the trip. So most of the work that we're doing now is boat side, and I just sort of wanted to share, this is Baker. This is one of the first moments that we had Baker next to the boat. So we have Brett here putting the tail rope on. We have Nigel here getting ready to assist. Again, just a really special moment to have an animal like this beside the boat. The work that we are currently doing, very fortunately, is supported and funded by a couple of grants that I always want to acknowledge. The SeaWorld Conservation Fund and the Busch Gardens Conservation Fund is helping us continue our overwintering work. And it's also helping us to support the field work that we've been doing with Nigel this summer, and the Disney Conservation Fund as well.
So now we'll open it up to questions. If anybody has any questions, if you want to put those in the chat, we do have some time to answer those. So Harley, I guess I will go on and ask a question to you, because I'm sure people might be wondering, we talk about Baker being such a large male. We just had a large male that we tagged back in the overwintering time frame named Contender, who became a pretty popular mature male white shark. Where does Baker line up size-wise to Contender?
So Contender was 13 feet 8 inches. Baker was 12 feet 10 inches. They're both in the adult size range for male sharks. Male white sharks mature at smaller sizes than the females, but certainly that range is very much an adult male animal. So it'll be interesting to follow both of their movements. I think Contender has yet to really show us where he's going to spend his summer and fall. So we're just sort of waiting on the tracker to see where he comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's see. We got a first question here. How long do the tags last? And I'm guessing they're probably referring to the spot tags that you guys can see. They're on the dorsal fin that everybody can track the sharks with on the tracker.
Yeah, so this image shows nicely the fin-mounted spot tag, and that is the satellite link tag that the tracker demonstrates for you. The animal has to come to the surface for a period of time, at which point it turns on. As far as how long the tags last, that has to do with the size. And depending on the size of animal, we put out different sizes of tags. So larger adult animals will be getting a tag that has a battery life of up to 5 years. The smaller animals that are subadult or juvenile are going to be getting smaller tags that only last between 1 to 2 years. So we should be able to follow all of these animals for 2 years or more, depending on the size tag that they receive.
Yeah, absolutely. Jumping kind of similar to that, how do you keep the shark calm enough to be able to do this workup and place those tags boat side?
In general, working with white sharks as a species, I would say, and having worked with many different shark species, both next to a boat as well as on our specialized lift, I would say that white sharks on the whole are actually a relatively calm species. Sharks do enter a state that's known as tonic immobility. It is a state where they are very calm. It's likened to sort of trance-like or anesthetic-like, and it typically occurs when you roll them upside down. So when we're doing these boat side workups in particular, these animals, when we roll them upside down in order to get the first blood samples and do some other tagging and measurement work, they do go into this state and they do become very calm as part of that process. When we're working with them on the lift, what's been interesting is picking these animals up. We do irrigate them with a hose, and they do enter very much a similar state, whereby they become very calm once they are secured out of the water and ventilated, and once we put them back in the water, become alert again and then leave.
Yeah, absolutely. So based off of, since we're kind of talking about those tags and the migration routes, we have a question here. What time of year do you find that the sharks leave Atlantic Canada and start to head south?
So the rough date is around about the 15th of October. Now, there will be some that leave earlier, there will be some that leave later, but based on that initial study that was published in 2021, that's around about the time period that they start that migration south.
Yep. We have another question here talking about their migrations and kind of life history. Basically talking about shark reproduction. Where do we think that is happening along the east coast of the U.S.?
For white sharks, I don't think we know yet. I think the one tiny piece that we've been able to uncover, particularly with the work that we've done in sort of that overwintering period, is that there are signs of reproductive activity, meaning that they are making sperm and potentially having follicles develop in that overwintering period. When anything happens after that is something that we're really trying to hone in on. I think what was exciting about this trip to the Tancook Island Marine Field Station was this was the first time we were able to catch, sample, and release animals in July. So every month that we're able to do that starts filling in the gaps in some of the biological data that we have. The tagging data has been great as far as showing us where in the world these animals go and when they go there. But the big gaps now, particularly from the biological side, are getting those monthly samples to try and figure out sort of bigger questions with regard to their physiology.
Well, and speaking of Baker, we have a question here. Have any of the white sharks been recorded north of Grand Banks beyond the east coast of Newfoundland? And we know we have had a handful of sharks go that far, kind of northeast. Didn't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have certainly had animals go all along the coast of Newfoundland and even as far as the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and beyond. So they do extensively use that area. And again, these are only tagged animals and we only know where they are when they're at the surface. So as far as where they could potentially go when they're below the surface, that's still something that I think we have a lot of questions about.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think the population of white sharks off Atlantic Canada is growing due to climate change?
So there are two publications that have come out recently, first of all, that are really starting to put support behind the fact that there is a growing number of white sharks using Atlantic Canada in the summer fall foraging period. You know, it's not just by mistake. It's not just because we're documenting them more, I should say. So the questions around why that might be happening are, number one, is the population size increasing? Number two, are the food resources in the area increasing? Marine mammals were protected in the US in the 70s and also went through similar protection processes in Canada. So the food resource there has been growing. And then, yes, you know, we're definitely seeing ocean change affect the migratory patterns and the range of different species of sharks, and that certainly could be a contributory factor. I think the big challenge with what's going on in Canada, and there are a number of groups up there doing great work trying to better understand how they use this region, is sample size. You know, even though we just tagged our 100th shark and the group that's out of Massachusetts has well over 300 acoustically tagged, and a number of other groups in Canada are working hard to tag animals and better understand them, that is still just a tiny sample size to try and answer these bigger questions and patterns about things like climate change. But this work is going to be important for that future of trying to understand it. Understanding where these sharks range now and seeing where they range in the future is only possible by doing this work on a significant number of animals.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another tag question here about how long they last. And again, I think we're kind of referring to spot tags and some, you know, kind of new or kind of interest in the shark tracker and how long we would be able to track these sharks, ideally if the battery life performs as it's supposed to.
Yeah, you know, I mean, ideally with the larger spots, we'll be able to track their movements for 5 years and you'll be able to see them. And then we've got a number of animals on there now, Breton being one of them, we've been able to track him for 5 years. And he was one of our Atlantic Canada sharks that was tagged early on in the process. Mm-hmm. The smaller tags will last about 2 years. And again, it is also very shark specific. There are sharks that like to spend time at the surface and will report in quite often. There are other sharks that really don't break the surface very often. We'll only hear from time to time. So if you don't wind up seeing, you know, sort of the shark that you're looking for on the tracker, it may just be that they're just not coming to the surface in order to be detected.
Right, absolutely. When did you find you first had a love for sharks and knew this is what you wanted to do?
That's a question?
That's a question. That's a great question.
Sure. I was always interested in, I won't necessarily say just marine life, but sort of strange animals when I was a kid. My father was a veterinarian. I knew I wanted to be a veterinarian, and I was always interested in sort of the next sort of most mysterious species. And definitely sharks were well on the docket for mysterious species. You know, I have to, you know, obviously say that I was influenced a little bit by Jaws. So many of us that become shark scientists were, and I think most of us just wound up seeing that and seeing a scientist that studied sharks going, that you can do that for a living. So I definitely had that moment, but I had sort of a unique path in it, in that I knew I wanted to be a veterinarian. I knew I wanted to work with wildlife. Aquatics, when I was doing my training, was not necessarily a discipline that you could work in. And I think because it was a really challenging discipline and you had to meet so many different people with different backgrounds, it became something that I really just pursued wholeheartedly once I finished all of my training.
That's awesome. Hopefully that will inspire some of the viewers that are out there tonight. If you guys have an interest in this, it is possible, and you can definitely pursue that interest, because there are lots of really cool jobs in this field, and we always need more scientists to study these animals so we can better protect them. We have a great question I think is going to kind of wrap us up tonight, Harley. Will you be back in Atlantic Canada? We have actually a lot of viewers tonight that look like they are tuning in from kind of the Nova Scotia, kind of eastern part of Canada area. And so I think they are interested in knowing if we're going to be helping back up at that field station again.
Yeah, we are. And, this was really meant to be an introduction to sort of a 3-part series. So this was just sort of to go over sort of how we wound up working in Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada, and what we know sort of at this point. The next 2, I'm very excited to say our primary collaborator there and the person who has put in place the Tancook Islands Marine Field Station, Dr. Nigel Hussey, will be on those, talking very specifically about the work that his field station is supporting, and sort of the plan for this summer residency period, and some of the questions that we want to answer. So our next after hours actually will be with myself and Dr. Hussey, primarily talking to him. And yes, so we've completed our July trip, and we have a plan to go back in September and October to do a very similar trip.
All right. Well, that's going to wrap up tonight's OCEARCH After Hours. Again, if you guys came in a little bit late, my name is Kara Lawless. I'm the education coordinator at OCEARCH, and joining me tonight was Chief Scientist and Veterinarian Dr. Harley Newton. Huge thank you for joining us this evening. Just a reminder, if you guys enjoyed tonight's conversation, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video to help spread the word about our work. And remember, our research and education programs are made possible by donations from people like you. If you can, please consider contributing to our fundraiser. The link is in the description and pinned in the comments. As Harley just mentioned, we'll be back for the next OCEARCH After Hours on September 18th at 7 p.m. Eastern, as we're going to take a closer look into the ongoing field research at the Tancook Islands Marine Field Station. So until then, thank you so much for your continued support, and we'll see you next time. Good night, everyone.